quiet evenings at the Pines. It started with the silence, not the usual blessed quiet of a country house, but the kind that descends after all other sounds have died. We bought an old log house on the edge of the village, the Pines, a city romantic's dream. Fresh air, the whisper of the forest, the cries of owls. The first 2 weeks were idyllic. Then the owls disappeared. I didn't notice it right away. It was just that one night, waking up to a feeling of absolute, hopeless emptiness outside the window, I realized the familiar hooting, that nightly soundtrack, was gone completely. The forest stood mute and wary, like a beast holding its breath. My wife Lena just shrugged. They must have moved on. Or maybe a pygmy owl showed up and scared them off. A pygmy owl, a cute, almost fairy tale explanation. We so wanted to believe it. 3 days after the owls vanished, Bantik, our tricolor cat, disappeared. He was a born hunter, but he always came back for breakfast. On the 3rd morning, his bowl was untouched. We searched the whole property, called for him, rattled the food can, silence in response. Just a strange, barely perceptible smell in the air, sweetish and musty, like the smell of old, rain-soaked fur. It hung around the old well, which the previous owners had sealed with an iron plate and covered with gravel. Lena cried. I said, maybe a fox took the cat, but foxes don't leave behind a smell like that, and they don't seal up wells. That night, I woke up for the first time because of a sound. No, not a sound. Because of its absence, the crickets. In summer, in such heat, the forest should have been loudly buzzing with millions of invisible musicians. But it was quiet, absolutely, as if someone had turned off the world. I went to the window. The moon was full and eerily bright, casting sharp, blade-like shadows. And in one of those shadows, in the middle of our lawn, stood a figure. It was unnaturally tall and thin, with long arms disproportionate to its body, and it wasn't moving. It just stood there, seemingly turned face on to the house. I couldn't make out any features, just a clot of darkness disrupting the geometry of the moonlight. My heart hammered somewhere in my throat. I blinked, wiped my palm across the cold glass, and the shadow was gone. It didn't dissolve, didn't leap back into the forest. It simply vanished, as if it had never been there. I chalked it up to fatigue, a trick of light and shadow. I didn't tell Lena. Why frighten her? The next day, our neighbor, Uncle Misha, an old man who had lived here his whole life, came over. He brought us a jar of salted mushrooms, but his eyes were shifty, anxious. "You're here alone, you young folks," he said, not looking at me. "Don't wander about at night, especially near that old well." "Why?" I asked, and everything inside me went cold. He was silent for a moment, lighting a hand-rolled cigarette with trembling hands. There was a family living here before the war. Germans, not Germans, doesn't matter. They were strict, God-fearing, and they had a daughter, not right in the head, cross-eyed, talked to herself. And things seemed to stick to her. A spoon would go missing, and it'd be under her pillow. Scissors, keys. He exhaled smoke heavily. The neighbors whispered she was possessed, and the father, the head of the family, was a severe man. One day, after a neighbor's sheep went missing and then was found, well, mutilated, behind the old shed, he decided he knew what was wrong. They took her to that well, told everyone. She ran away. I felt goosebumps run down my back. And then, and nothing. A week later, the whole family died in their sleep. Not from sickness, nothing. Just didn't wake up in the morning. And on their table lay that same missing sheep. Or rather, what was left of it. And it smelled like in a damp cellar where wet fur is rotting. He looked at me directly, and in his eyes was mute horror. The plate on the well and the gravel that was the new owner's about 30 years ago wanted to dig it out. One of them, the most curious one, was found the next morning sitting by that well, alive. But he kept rubbing his palms together as if wiping off something sticky. And he kept repeating, "She just wanted to play. She just wanted me to stay." Then they took him to the city, to an asylum, and the well was sealed shut for good. After he left, it got even worse. The story was the nonsense of a superstitious old man, but the smell, that same smell I had already sensed. That night, Lena woke up because someone was scratching at the wall. Not from outside, from inside. A thin, scraping sound, like a nail on plaster, coming from the space between the paneling and the logs. It came from the corner of the bedroom, exactly from the wall facing the old well. I frantically pounded the wall with my fist, yelling, "Get out!" The scratching stopped, but a minute later, a new sound came, a child's whisper, tender, sorrowful, seeming to come from the very corner of the room, from a crack. "Play with me. I've been alone for so long." Lena pressed into me, trembling. I tried to convince us both that it was the wind, that we were imagining things. But the whisper repeated, closer now, right by the head of the bed. "Your cat. He's a good toy, but he misses you. Do you want me to bring him back?" And then that sweetish, musty smell of wet fur hung in the room, unbearably strong. We didn't sleep until morning, with all the lights on in the house. During the day, while Lena, pale as death, tried to doze in a sun lounger, I made a decision. I took a crowbar, a flashlight, and went to the well. I was determined to dismantle that plate, look down there, and prove to myself there was nothing, just an old, deep hole. The gravel was hard to move. The iron plate, rusted through, gave way with an awful screech. Under it were thick, blackened boards. I inserted the crowbar, pushed with all my weight. The board gave way with a crunch, and immediately that same smell, concentrated, almost tangible, burst from the darkness. I turned on the flashlight, pointed the beam down. The well was very deep. The walls, lined with slippery stone, gleamed in the flashlight's beam. And at the bottom, in a puddle of murky water, lay something white. I looked closer. It was a sheepskin, balled up, absolutely clean, without traces of bones or flesh. Next to it lay a small, decayed shoe. And then the flashlight beam picked out, from the darkness on the wall of the well, right opposite me, a face. It wasn't alive or dead. It was drawn on the stone with charcoal or dirt. Two slanted eyes looking in different directions, and a wide mouth stretching to the ears. A child's drawing. But the expression was infinitely lonely, hungry, and filled with such ancient, inhuman longing that my breath caught, and the drawing blinked. I stumbled back, fell on my back. The flashlight flew from my hands and rolled away, switching off. I had to run, but I froze, unable to move, listening to the quiet, wet sound coming from the black hole of the well, a rustling, as if something wet and hairy was crawling up the stones. Slowly, relentlessly, I scrambled up and ran to the house, shouted to Lena to get inside, lock the doors. We spent our last night in the house in the living room, having pushed a heavy sideboard against the sofa, barricading the door. The shutters were closed on all the windows. We sat hugging each other, listening to it walk around the house. First on the roof, heavy, dragging steps, then scraping along the outside wall, as if with long nails, whispering under the windows, blending dozens of voices, a child's babble, an old man's wheeze, the rustle of dry leaves. Play, play with us. We're cold, we're lonely. Then it started knocking on the door, not pounding, but knocking with its knuckles, politely, persistently. Lena sobbed, covering her ears. I clutched a hunting knife, understanding its utter uselessness. At 3 a.m, silence fell. That same all-consuming silence. We weren't fooled. We knew this was the calm before the worst. It didn't enter through the door or the window. It seeped from within. From a crack between the floorboards in the corner of the room, a black, shiny, tar-like substance began to creep. It spread across the floor, the walls, the ceiling, swallowing the light from our flashlights and candles. And from this blackness, things began to emerge. The missing spoon, scissors, our car keys, Bantik's toy ball. They fell to the floor with a soft thud. And then in the center of the room, From the very heart of this shadow, something began to form. It gathered itself from the gloom, from the smell of wet fur and a child's weeping. It was tall, thin, with long arms. Its face was distorted by a grimace that was either a smile or a sob, and its eyes looked in different directions, one at me, the other at Lena. It stretched out a hand, a finger, long and mangy, pointed at Lena. "Mommy," it whispered in a voice that held the grating of gravel at the bottom of a well. "I'm back. Play with me." Lena made a sound I had never heard from a living person. She squeezed her eyes shut, turned away. The creature slowly turned its head. Now both its eyes were fixed on me. "Daddy!" I screamed. I screamed from horror, from despair, from the understanding that this wasn't a ghost, not a demon. This was resentment. Resentment, loneliness, and a craving for love, locked in darkness for decades. It had condensed like a tumor, absorbed the fear of everyone who had lived here, and become this. I threw the knife at it. The blade passed right through, leaving no mark, and fell into the darkness with a clatter. It took a step forward. The shadow crawled after it, swallowing the room. The cold emanating from it squeezed tears from my eyes. "Stay!" it roared now, not in a child's voice, but in a multiple, organ-like voice. "Stay and play forever." I grabbed Lena's hand. One single window, a small one in the utility room, was still untouched by the blackness. We ran, stumbling, falling, kicking aside toys crawling from the shadow, a teddy bear with empty eye sockets, a spinning top rotating by itself. I smashed the frame with my shoulder. We tumbled out into the cold night, into the prickly raspberry bushes, and ran without looking back to the car. We left everything, the house, our things, memories. Told the police we just got a bad feeling, urgent business in the city. They looked at us like we were crazy. 6 months have passed. We rent an apartment in a noisy, bright, living city. Lena hardly leaves the house. I sleep with the light on, and sometimes, very rarely, amidst the nighttime city hum, I think I hear a sliver of power, silence, running along the edge of my hearing, and then a faint grating in the wall, thin like a nail scratch. And yesterday I found a small wet clump of fur on the threshold of our apartment, tricolor, and I smelled that familiar sweetish musty smell. She finds those who once heard her call. She's in no hurry. She has eternity, and she just wants someone to play with. Do you hear that? Right now, in your house, is it absolutely quiet?